We are looking at what is known as the Lucena position in chess endgame study. And like the Philidor position that I covered in my previous video, you are working with a rook and a pawn versus a rook, and of course the kings. Take a moment to contemplate what's the outcome of this game if it's white to move. And now that you've had a moment, the answer here is white will win. And in fact, white will win regardless of who is to move. But we're going to take a look at this with white to move. So really quickly, the idea here is to promote your pawn, but your own king is standing in the way. And what black is trying to do is either keep you in check somehow or keep your king from being able to get out of your own pawn's way. That's the problem statement in a nutshell. So if it's white to move, can't really do much about the rook, but the king, on the other hand, we can attempt to push away. So moving your rook is a great way to do it. And the king will have to choose between one of these three squares. Now you may be asking yourself, well, what about this square? This square seems really annoying. It keeps it near your pawn, and that is a good way of thinking. You should be thinking about refutations. So let's play that out very briefly. So if the king moved here, then you can simply do this as white. And black has essentially created even a bigger problem for themselves because the rook can't go here because you would gobble it up with your pawn, and it can't check your king because its own king is in the way. So that is why that is a bad move for black. So black moves to the side, and this is the beginning of the technique because you're trying to create breathing room for your king. And it's white to move. And so this next moment right here is very important. It's what's referred to as building the bridge. And for me, I think about this as a multi-stage process. And I am going to highlight squares for you to help you visualize it how my brain does. So you make a move with your rook and you place it on the fourth rank of the board. And I like to visualize this as the seam line or the edge of the lower half of the board, the green edge, right? Whereas there's also the seam line for the upper half of the board, which I've highlighted in red. And so with the rook right here, the next move that black makes is some sort of shuffling move because it can't really make any progress. And the next move that white needs to consider is getting out of the way of its pawn. And it actually has breathing room now because this king is no longer as close as it was before. So black will attempt to harass the white king as long as possible with checks. So check, king moves this way because it can only move either here or here, and going backward would make no sense. Black checks again. The white king is going to make a slightly unintuitive move, but not really. If the king were to go here, for example, it would hang its own pawn. Thus, it needs to stay within the protection zone of this pawn. So the king moves to the side. And then black will attempt to just continue to check. But here is, we'll call it step 2 of building the bridge. The king steps onto the red rank, the 5th rank. And this is another key moment. So the rook will again check. But now white's rook can actually complete the bridge, if you will, where they are both standing right on top of one another on the same file on the 4th and 5th ranks. And now this white rook essentially is acting as a shield. So there's nothing more that black can do other than attempt to move closer to gobble up the pawn, and the pawn promotes. And that's the technique. That is known as the Lucena position. Hope this helps.